Good morning, church family.
Good morning.
I'm reminded that this coming Tuesday is Veterans Day. And I wonder if there are any veterans in the audience. Yes, or any parents that have children that are in the military. I know Meg Pinner's son is in the military, Jonathan. So I just wanted to, on behalf of all of us, say thank you to our military members, and it's because of them that we have the ability to come here on a Sabbath day and worship openly and freely. And we have the right to live and eat as we will. And that's what I'm going to talk about this morning on the health and temperance, your least favorite subject. Now, I have notes that would last probably for an hour's worth of presentation, but I'm going to split into 2 months worth, this month and next. And it's the title of the notes were made when I did a presentation at the Windermere Church some 16 years ago, entitled Vegetarianism, Is It For You? And I have had some good works come from talking about this before. Once, about, I guess, a good almost 20 years ago, or it wasn't that long, when we were building this church that you're sitting in, the guy was a builder that did the stucco work on the outside of this church, was named Ted Milam. He attended one of the midweek prayer services in which I was giving a talk on this very same subject of the health message and vegetarianism. And he was an avid meat eater, and he was also significantly overweight and had a terrible problem, a skin problem. I think it was shingles that was really plaguing him, and he had for years and couldn't get rid of it. So after the talk I gave, believe it or not, he was inspired enough to try it. And he left 2 weeks later to go up to Tennessee, where he was building a cabin on a lake on a property he had up in Sevierville. And Ted was up there all by himself, out in the woods, and he ate nothing but pretty much raw fruits and vegetables. And he came back, and he wasn't overweight anymore. A month later, he was really strong and fit, and he told me that his shingles problem had finally gone away just by doing that. Now, there's no glory in it for me, because I know it was all the Lord's doing. This is what the Lord prescribed in the book of Genesis: fruits and vegetables, nuts and grains. Okay, vegetarianism, is it for you? First of all, I'm not condemning meat eating at all, because meat eating is biblical. Christ ate meat. What I am saying is that you're no better for being a vegetarian, but you're a lot better off, because meat eating today in America is dangerous. I don't mean it's not the best, it's not okay. It's dangerous to your health. And let me explain why. You have a 9% lower chance of dying in the next 5 years if you're a lacto-ovo vegetarian. But if you're a vegan vegetarian, you have a 15% lower chance of dying in the next 5 years. That's just raw statistics. Now, when I did this presentation, that's 16 years ago, I looked up the numbers and found that Seventh-day Adventists were 36% vegetarian. They were 49% vegetarian, almost half. Now, I updated this a little bit recently, and 36% of us only are vegetarian. Only 8% of us are vegan vegetarian. Now, even in spite of that, in the Adventist health study that was done years ago, we live an average of 7 to 10 years longer, which is quite a good bonus. But it's only a good bonus if you have a good quality of life. No one wants to live extra years of suffering. And I think I've pointed out before, another good reason to stay healthy is because you love your spouse. You don't want your spouse to have to take care of an invalid for year after year after year. So for those are really good reasons to keep your health up, among some others we're going to go into. Now, Ellen White writes in Healthful Living, the meat diet is a serious question. Shall human beings live on the flesh of dead animals? I told Joe Saladino I was doing this just for him, because Joe and I are treasure hunting buddies. Shall human beings live on the flesh of dead animals? The answer from the light that God has given is no, decidedly no. And she goes on to say, but I wish to say that when the time comes, it is no longer safe to use milk, cream, butter, and eggs. God will reveal this. That's from Counsels on Diets and Foods. I'm one that believes it has been revealed. And if you don't know some of the dangers that are in the dairy and eggs, in this country, unless you're raising your own out in the woods somewhere where you don't buy any of the Purina chicken chow or animal chow that has antibiotics and hormones already mixed in it. You can't buy animal food without all these things in it. Unless you can do that, you should probably pretty well stay away from it. When I grew up, the U.S. government put out these charts we had on the walls of our school made up by the Meat and Dairy Council that had the pyramid of the foods that you should eat. And it was always very heavily with meat had its own, and then there was the dairy had their own slide, and then a little bit of fruit and vegetables wouldn't hurt. But today we know that that's not really the best way. In fact, back in 1996, in Science News, this article said, this week, officials of the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the Health and Human Services tacitly endorsed vegetarian diets in the guidelines, that is the dietary guidelines for America, for the first time. For the first time, an agency which has been very biased towards the meat industry has acknowledged that vegetarian diets are helpful. Now, the standard American diet, or SAD, with heavy meat and dairy consumption is the single greatest cause of death in the United States, and it should carry a warning label. But some people say, are human beings designed to be carnivores or herbivores? Should we eat meat or not, by the way we're made? Let me talk about this from the same lady that wrote the other quotes from the Second Advent Review and Sabbath Herald of 5/8/1883. She says, meat is not essential for health or strength, else the Lord made a mistake when he provided for food for Adam and Eve before their fall. All the elements of nutrition are contained in the fruits, vegetables, and grains. And I think we're one of the few species that actually, as adults, even drink milk. This issue of carnivore or herbivore, I've had battles with in my professional career. I had one boss, and I can tell you that in the aerospace defense industry, there's a lot of really strong-willed people, let's say. And so my boss, Archie, and I were having an argument one day on whether or not humans were designed to be herbivores or carnivores. And he was insistent that we had to have meat, and we were designed to have meat. And I said, okay, you can convince me, Archie. I said, let's go down to a butcher shop, and I'll buy you a big old chunk of steak, and I'll throw it out on the sidewalk outside, raw, right there. And if you pounce down and start eating it, I'll believe you. He quit bothering me about it. Now, the designs of our jaw and our teeth are for, just like a cow's for biting off stuff and grinding it side to side. Lions and dogs and other carnivores, their jaws only go up and down. They don't grind side to side and don't have the molars. This was from quotes from a guy, Dr. W.S. Collins, on a report to the American Society for the Study of Arteriosclerosis. He said, examination of the dental structure of modern man reveals that he possesses all the features of a strictly herbivorous animal. While designed to subsist on vegetarian foods, he has perverted his dietary habits to the food of the carnivore. And he goes on to say, herein may lie the basis for the high incidence of human arteriosclerotic disease. That's easy for you to say. Now, what about the design of our colons? The human being colon goes anywhere from 20, or not the colon, but the whole intestinal tract, goes anywhere from 20 to 40 feet long. That means whatever we eat's in there for a good while. Now, if we eat vegetables, they stay in there and they do their digesting. But if we eat meat, it begins to putrefy in about a day. And we're getting this putrefaction in all kinds of chemicals it produces that are then going into our bloodstreams. Now, a lion, on the other hand, instead of a 20 to 40 foot dietary tract, has a 5-foot tract. And it's not just that, but the shape of it's different. Ours is all bumpy and all kinds of places for things to get trapped in there, but the lion's has smooth, slick fibers in it, so that what he eats, he gets it and then gets it out quick before it has time to putrefy and be poisonous to him. Not only that, but the stomach acid in these carnivores is 20 times as strong as it is in our system. So he's going to digest that meat in a hurry. But if we eat the meat, it's going to stay there and rot for a couple days. And for some people, believe it or not, some people don't have that many bowel movements. Instead of 2 or 3 a day like they ought to have, they have 1 a week maybe. There are people like that, and they get sick. What about vitamin B12? Don't we get that from meat? And isn't that essential to our nutrition? And how can you live without it? Again, in my aerospace career, I had this colleague that he was into health and all this kind of thing. But years later, after we both had left Martin Marietta, I went to visit him at his business. He started a business in Orlando. And he said, "Are you still a vegetarian?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "Well, how can you do it? And don't you know you have to have vitamin B12? And I said to him, "Well, I don't know. What kind of symptoms should I be exhibiting, because I feel fine?" And he says, and it had been like 7-10 years after I had seen him. And he says, "Well, I got to admit, you look pretty good." It turns out, I found out that the vitamin B12 doesn't come from meat. It's not in the flesh. It's manufactured by bacteria, and you manufacture your own in your own colon and probably in your mouth. But the B12 you get in meat, that comes from manure contamination. So I asked him maybe he could just take some manure pills and be okay. But nobody seems to go for that one. But what about contamination in the animal foods that you buy at the meat market? Doesn't our government protect us from that? Does our government protect us from anything? It's a fact that most government meat inspectors are vegetarians. And if they aren't when they start, they will be. We used to have in this very church a person whose family member was the head of the meat inspectors for the southeast of the United States. And he would come in and give us lectures on this about how he became a vegetarian. But it's true. If you could see what goes on, you wouldn't want it. It says in Leviticus 3, verse 17, "It shall be a perpetual statute for your generations throughout all your dwellings that you eat neither fat nor blood." Do you think you can buy a piece of meat in the market that doesn't have fat and blood in it? I don't think you can. Well, then there's diseases. In the meat, you've got E. coli, salmonella, bovine AIDS. Yeah, they got AIDS. Mad cow disease. You know where that mad cow disease came from? From feeding animal tissue to vegetarian cows. And they developed the same thing that some of the tribes in Africa had developed, a disease called kuru, which they got from eating the brains of their enemies. Yeah, they were cannibals. So, mad cow disease, it's the same sort of thing. Spongiform encephalopathy. Yeah, encephalopathy is what you get from eating bad cows. They also get cancer from meat. In fact, I had a colon doctor tell me that colon cancer is caused by one thing only: eating meat. It also has heavy metals and pesticides in it. If you think, because I used to have, for instance, my brother once told me, "Well, you get pesticides when you eat grains or plants or anything." I says, "Yeah, but In animals, they've been eating them all their life, and they save them in their tissues, and you eat what they eat for years. So you get years worth of pesticides and that sort of thing. Then there's the antibiotics, which they give to cows so that they can stay alive and make more milk and stuff. They give hormones, like one of them is they give estrogen to cows so that they'll produce, fatter tissue. They'll weigh more, so they get more money when they sell them. But then that puts extra estrogen into the populace. And I've heard of young girls in Puerto Rico, for instance, that were going through puberty before 10 and having children about that age. And that should not happen. And it wouldn't happen if they weren't eating meat that's filled with estrogen. And I don't know whether the rest of you have noticed it or not, because I'm old enough to remember, but in the last 40 years or so, since, of course, the meat eating's gone up a lot, but men are becoming more effeminate. And the rise of homosexuality in this country, I think, is probably in large part due to this injection of estrogen into the food animals. Well, I'm going to have to quit pretty soon, but I want to go through one more here. Let's talk about the protein myth. There's a daily requirement you need for protein, and it's different for different folks. For instance, if you're a child, an athlete, or if you've been injured, you need more protein to repair your body, to grow, etc. But for the rest of us, we eat much too much protein. You don't need it. And, they talk about you got to have a complete protein. I bet you've heard that before, haven't you? Being a vegetarian Adventist, you have to have a complete protein. You eat beans with rice and all that. It's all bunk. It's based on studies from rats done back in the 1930s. And we're not rats. We don't even need the same amino acids they do. And no matter what you eat, if you eat from a variety of things, any food, apple, has plenty of protein in it too. And you get it from all different sources, and you break down the amino acids, and you take the ones you need here, with the ones from that food, save them up, put them together, and you can make whatever protein you need to synthesize. Now, the downside of eating too much is that protein, like I said, is amino acids. If you get amino acids in your body, the body has a regulation in it that it has to keep the pH content, that is the acid-alkaline balance, right at 7.2. Otherwise, you'll die. So it'll do anything to keep that pH balanced. Well, guess what? If you're eating a lot of extra protein and your amino acids are going high in your bloodstream, the body's going to buffer that protein and get rid of it, because it doesn't store protein at all. It has to get rid of whatever you're not using. Well, the way it buffers it is to take the calcium out of your bones. And that's why we got so much osteoporosis. Now, if you compare the demographics with other countries that eat low protein diets, they don't have osteoporosis like this country does. The funny thing is, they say that you ought to drink more milk to get your calcium. Yeah, but the milk's full of protein that gets rid of the calcium you already have, so you end up with a net loss. Then there's all kinds of allergies. I recall Dennis McKeever once saying that when he was young, he was a heavy milk drinker, and he had problems, I think it was with acne or something. Correct me if I'm wrong, Sharon, but he said when he gave up milk drinking, all that went away. And I've heard a lot of people say that. There's a problem with anemia. Infants sometimes have leaky gut syndrome, or internal bleeding of the colon. If they drink milk, it turns out that the protein in milk, this stuff in the big jars of whey, that all the athletes want to take down, that stuff has an identical chemical nature to the protein on the external surface of the pancreas. And guess what happens when you take something like this foreign protein in milk, especially in a child? If they have the leaky gut syndrome, that protein goes directly into the bloodstream. And the body sees it, and it starts making antigens against this foreign invader. And those antigens will not only attack that protein, but the surface of the pancreas, and that's what causes child-onset diabetes. So if you don't want your kids to have that, don't feed them cow's milk. Then I could go on with atherosclerosis, arthritis, the mad proteins or the prions that you get from mad cows, and in the food groups. Oh. Also, you've heard of a lot of food combining and stuff, right? We once had these food combining charts on this stuff. You can't have this with that or that with that. We had 3 or 4 different charts on the refrigerator, and I pointed out to Linda one day, none of these agree. I said, here's my food combining. We'll do what it says in the spirit of prophecy. It's best not to eat fruits and vegetables together. Other than that, have at it. The more the better of everything you can get. You're next. Thank you.